Hello everyone, I am fresh off playing the Granblue Fantasy Versus closed beta, and would like to share some of my thoughts on the game, some of my first impressions. If you're not familiar with Granblue Fantasy, it's a browser and mobile game that's very popular in Japan, and recently it's inspired two pretty significant spin-off games. One of them is Granblue Fantasy Versus, which is a one-on-one fighting game being developed by Arc System Works. Just looking at the game, you'll see the Arc System Works pedigree. It uses the same 3D anime art style that we've seen in their previous games. So think Guilty Gear Xrd, and Dragon Ball Fighters. And this combined with the really fantastic art direction makes this one of the best looking games that I've seen maybe ever. I also love the soundtrack, which uses music from the original game, which is very good. And it turns that music into something that's maybe a little more appropriate for the genre. Overall, I think they've done a really good job capturing the charm of the series, which itself is heavily inspired by old JRPGs. If you're into that kind of thing, I think you'll agree it looks great, and I just think it's hard not to like it when you look at it. That aside, this is a fighting game, and no amount of art or music is going to help if the gameplay isn't good, of course. So, is it good? Well, I think this is another area that we can definitely trust Arc System Works to deliver on. And in this case, the controls are responsive and satisfying just as much as you'd expect. But of course, there are a few unique twists on the systems. For example, overall, I feel like it's a little bit slower paced than I expected. There's no air dashing, your meter build's really slow, and all the characters have kind of very simple movesets. It almost reminds me more of a Street Fighter game than an anime fighter. Now, I know opinions will vary on whether that is a good or a bad thing. Personally, I think it's just a matter of preference, and I like both. And in this case, I really do like the slower pace. It feels a little bit different than the anime fighters, and I feel like I can really soak in what the game has to deliver. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the mechanics, as I'm sure there will be many other videos that are going to cover that, but I do want to mention one of the more unique systems in the game. Your special moves all have cooldowns, and on the surface, I think this is just a nod to how skills work in the original game, but it also does serve two main purposes here. First, the cooldowns act as a meter for the EX or powered up versions of your special moves. So this would be opposed to the more traditional method of just draining a chunk of your super bar. And I think I might like this better. I certainly wouldn't mind seeing it in more games. Now, the second thing is the cooldowns are used as part of the game's attempt to be more accessible to less experienced fighting game players. Now, each of your special moves can be performed by pushing the R1 button and a direction on the controller. It feels kind of similar to how special moves would work in Super Smash Bros., to use an example. Now, the catch is using the R1 button will result in longer cooldown times on your skills. If you want to use your moves faster, you can input the traditional fighting game commands and then just go ahead and spam those fireballs to your heart's content. I don't know how helpful this system actually is, but I did think it was kind of neat to see the attempt to use the original game mechanics and interpret them into a fighting game setting. Now, I've said a lot of good things so far, but of course there are some concerns. I have to question if Granblue Fantasy Versus is maybe too simple. Each character has a very tiny moveset with only 3 or 4 moves if you count their unique actions, and they also only have 2 super moves, the second which can only be used if your health is at 30% or below. Now, on top of that, I did not play a single round where either player gained more than 1 super bar in that round. And it wasn't even close. You basically got your super bar toward the end of the round. It didn't seem like there were a lot of options to shake up the gameplay in any given round. They kind of would play out in similar ways depending on your character. Now, I'm no fighting game expert here, so I might be missing something. So I'd like to see more of the pro players really dig into it and maybe they'll be able to find another layer of depth in here that I'm not seeing yet. But that was a bit of a concern for me. Now, that said, I think you could make a case for less being more in this situation. As a more casual fighting game player myself, I do appreciate a game that has a skill cap high enough that I can feel like I've accomplished something when I learn the game, but also low enough that I can still feel like I'm competent at it without having to sink dozens or even hundreds of hours into training. After the few hours I've played in the beta, I do feel like Granblue Fantasy Versus is on its way to hitting that sweet spot, and I really hope it gets there. Now, the last thing I want to mention is the odd choice of characters for the beta. First of all, everyone is blue. There is so much blue everywhere. All the characters have blue color palettes, and like half of them have water and ice powers. It's a little weird. I'd also argue that there's not a ton of variety in how they play. They all have similar movesets. Of course, the ranges and level of power and how much damage they do are all a bit different. But almost all of them do boil down to the traditional, fireball, dragon punch, dash attack moves. The only exception really was Fairy, who had some kind of unique mechanics into how her abilities work. But all the other ones kind of felt a little bit same-ish, and I'd like to see more variety there. Of course, this is just the beta, and we haven't seen the full roster yet. It is encouraging to think about Granblue Fantasy has literally hundreds of characters that they can pull from, and we've actually already seen 2 announced that didn't make the cut for the beta, but they do look very different than the currently available fighters. So, I'm still encouraged in that department. It's far too early to make any judgments on the roster. We'll have to see on that. I also shouldn't complain, since if you're watching the footage, you can see I almost exclusively use Catalina, and she's certainly not the most exciting option on the roster in the beta. But, come on, look at her. Look how cool she is. Now, overall, I did expect Granblue Fantasy Versus to be a solid fighting game because it is being developed by Arc System Works. And I think playing the beta, I've been reassured that that's going to be the case. I will definitely need to see more variety on the remaining roster. But that aside, I don't really have any major complaints. We'll have to see if they can deliver when the game gets released later this year. No release date yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. So that'll do it for this video. This is our first attempt at this kind of thing, so let us know if you like it, and if you'd like to see more in the future. I will see what we can do. And of course, please check out our content at theglorioblog.com, where we do previews, reviews, podcasts, and whatever else we feel like doing to cover anime and anime-adjacent media. Check it out, and we'll see everyone next time.